Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Coding and Philosophy podcast. I'm Juho.
And I am Chi.
Yep, drinking tea yet again, such as the last episode. Today, I'm going to be reiterating something which, I spent some time thinking about, which is, the nature of programs.
The nature of program.
And I came up with some analogies on how to actually explain them to people who, don't understand what they are, right? And one analogy was that, and this is the one I use to explain a program to someone who's not technical, is you can think of a coding program as a movie script that you write. And the same way when you write a movie script and you hand it over to some producer / director and they go record the movie and make the movie, you can also use the same line of thinking for computer programs, where you write a bunch of code with your code editor and then you just run it. You hand it over to the computer. Hey, here's a bunch of text, and you just hand it over, because that's all programs really are, just a bunch of text files organized in a certain fashion and put inside different folders. But yeah,
I see programmer, the orchestration of commands put together, trying to tell the computers performing a specific sequences of tasks.
Yeah. And one thing which also, I think this is a very a key concept to understand once you start out with programming or start into getting into computers, because as programmers we use a lot of we use the terminal a lot, and that the terminal, the CMDX, right? It's a concept that, let's say, normal computer users don't have an idea about, right? But, the history of it is that's the way all computers used to be, right? And then someone just came along and decided, hey, let's make this a bit more, user-friendly, with the GUI.
I think prior to that, computer doesn't even have a terminal. It's just a bunch of levers and buttons.
Well, that's true. It was all...
I think it started out with Alan Turing with his machines, decrypting machine, and perhaps it's just buttons and switches, which is mechanicals, and there's no keyboard or no terminal as the output whatsoever. So it can be dated as back as that, and perhaps some history development until it arrives at the terminal. And then we as in developers or programmers use the terminals because I see it is an efficient way to communicate with the computers rather than the graphical interfaces. We can do everything with the graphical interfaces. I even see you refuses to use git command, but rather relying on the interface of Visual Studio Code to perform GitHub commands or git command. While some people prefer to rely on the terminal and use all sort of git operations.
Well, the way I like to look at it is that if someone has built a tool, a visual tool,
which is the interfaces, right?
Yeah.
The user interfaces, they are tools.
So why use the git command if someone took the time out of their busy schedule to build a tool like this git commands that you can use with Visual Studio Code? You can just click on stuff rather than write the actual command itself. So out of respect for the person who made those, I'm going to use them.
Mm-hmm. Then, returning to your story, what would you like to tell a programmer or non-tech people the story about Terminal 4, when in the end their level of concern it's just the interface?
Well, I think it's important to understand the layers when it comes to computers. Or whenever you get into any subject, you should first understand the history of how you got there. So,
Should you?
Well, so in my mind, it gives some
Well,
cohesion.
I would say if I want to
comprehension.
study about math, first I approach it from the formulaic level, and then I deep down level into how math comes into immersion. The formal math comes into immersion. And in the case of our programming, when we first start to code, we learn console.log. We learn print hello world. We doesn't immediately go into how JavaScript it's invented.
Yeah, that's a valid point. But I think as well, I would equate it as normal humans. We have an interest in history. Even though we're living in this century right now, we still want to figure out what happened previously, before us. I think it's just a natural want and instinct to have as a human. So, yeah, or maybe that's just me. That's because we all have different perspectives. But yeah, what is the utility of understanding what came before? Why is the history of terminals important?
From my perspective, a new learner of programming learn the terminal as a tool-like object. We approach terminal because it's a tool during the process of learning to program. We are using the terminal to run the program.
Yeah, I think my preference, if I'm gonna learn, if I was put into the shoes of someone who is learning about terminals, I would prefer to know the history of them, not just how are they used and what are they used for.
I haven't learned about the history of terminal, but I learned the commands of it, and then learned the scripting language of terminal, the bash language, to be specific. Wait, is bash only pertaining to Ubuntu and Z shell? And in Windows it is PowerShell. Anyhow, I digress. But more practical side of it, what do you learn about the history of the terminal?
Well, how that's the way that all computers used to look like. I haven't delved deep into it, but just it was all text-based. And then, well, as I said, someone came along and said there has to be a better way to do this, something more user-friendly.
But I really think they put a user interface in order to be able to sell the computers to non-tech people who could not deal with just text.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a business scheme as well.
True that. Yeah. Well, something which I did kind of talk about when talking, and I think this is important when talking about, well, just lost my train of thought. When you're explaining the basics of programming and the basic toolkits, what a programmer uses, well, you have the terminal, right? And you have the whatever Visual Studio Code or whatever
Code
IDE.
editor.
Yeah,
Yes.
whatever
Integrated
code.
developer.
Exactly.
I forgot the acronym. Integrated Development Environment, perhaps.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And about that, I actually have a thought that new beginners may not even need to download VSC or terminal yet. They can use a cloud IDE, which is prevalent on this day and age. And in the case of JavaScript, just open the console in the browser, and then just write from there.
Yeah, but that's a very limited form, and well, it depends on. Well, I can't really say it's a limited form. It's just a preference, I would say.
Perhaps it's a preference.
But if you're a beginner, what do you want to learn? Well, I think once you get into cloud-based,
I still use cloud-based IDE because of its. There is something in me really like about cloud-based IDE. I'm trying to discern the exact motivation. Perhaps it's not fast. It's not fast per se because we have a certain limit on the computation capacity. It's okay. It's fun. Cloud-based IDE to me looks really fun, and it's a good product. It's a good product.
But wouldn't you say that if, let's say, I'm a beginner just getting into coding, it would be too much for me to understand? Well, first of all, I need to figure out what an IDE is actually. And then on top of it, it's a cloud-based IDE. That's way too many concepts all at once.
Not really, because when you download Visual Studio Code, you have to download the additional runtime environment, which is either Python or Node. But in the Cloud IDE, everything is just set up for you. So you just have to register for the account and open a file, and then you have your runtime environment ready set up. So you can write immediately the code you want to learn, the program you want to learn. The environment is all set up for you.
Okay, here's a question. Does it have, like with my Visual Studio Code, I have the extensions, and they're easy to add, and kind of these plugins and stuff like that?
About extension, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about the extension, but at least I know they have lint formatters. And if you are talking about Node, you have the capacity to install every packages.
Okay, every packages.
Every packages like npm install.
I see.
VSC extension that enhance the productivity inside the Visual Studio Code, I'm not so sure that the cloud environment, the cloud IDE provides that. But for beginners, you don't need to worry about the runtime. You don't need to worry about the environment, to worry about installing Node and Python. And then you can just start out with learning the programming concepts. And then a week, 2 weeks later, when you have some kind of trajectory, get the ball rolling, and you have some motivation, then he or she is more inclined to actually commit to a bigger task, like setting up the development environment locally.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Is as a beginner programmer, you want to break it down to as simply as possible. And if you just focus on the code without thinking about the environment, then
it's the thing is, I haven't properly put myself in the perspective of beginners. I haven't been a beginner for some times, so I cannot say things for their sake. I cannot say that with this current situation. I can try to infer from them. If there's happen to be a beginners here, I would love to ask his view or her view. Funny enough, one of the learning resources that I think it is a solid one, start with learning the terminals. Learning the terminal before actually learning to code in JavaScript or in any programming language. The terminal, it's the first thing that it teaches.
Yeah. But with that, I think we can say goodbye to you guys.
Oh,
and
15 minutes has gone pretty fast.
Yes, it sometimes happens. But yes, see you all in the next episode of Coding and Philosophy. And what do you always say? Say it to the camera. We have a camera now.
You have a camera now. Keep on coding.
What do you always say?
And
Say it to the camera. We have a camera now.
See you. Keep on coding.
And philosophize. See you.